Okay, cool. All right. Here we go. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Deirdre Sorego. I am the Business Development Executive for BlueStar. We are hosting a fabulous webinar today on working from home litigation readiness and data preservation considerations panel. We have an amazing panel today for you today. For those of you that are not familiar with BlueStar, we are a full service e-discovery, lit support, and data solutions consultancy firm since 2003.
Hey, Rich, do you know where the cake pans are?
Yeah, the cake pans, sorry guys, working from home.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm on like a really important webinar for work right now. No, you're not on camera. The cake pans are ready at Walmart. Show them that and pick those up. Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, please do. I'm sorry about that. Working from home. It's the new pandemic. This is what we're in now. Welcome to 2020. I don't know how your 2020 has been for you, but it's been like that for us. So
perfect introduction.
At least I don't have kids or dogs, otherwise I'm sure you'd be hearing those. But so if you are interested in knowing more about BlueStar, down below is our www.bluestarcs.com. You can also email us at info@bluestarcs.com for any of your e-discovery or litigation needs. We are there for you with concierge service. So a little bit about 2020. It's been crazy. This pandemic has definitely been altering to us. It's changed our work life, our home life. It's changed the way we work, where we work, and the technology that we're using while we're working from home. And also it's changing the way that we communicate with each other. So with that said, I would like to turn over the panel to our lovely moderator, who is one of our own, Sarah Thompson. She's a Chief Product Officer here at BlueStar, to introduce our amazing panel. So Sarah, take it away.
Thanks so much, Deirdre, and thanks to everybody who's attending today. I think this is going to be an amazing panel. We are going to talk today about all the things that are keeping us up at night from a legal perspective, or perhaps should be, and maybe how we can get sleep a little better. And so we have an amazing panel here, and I think that we bring a lot of different perspectives to the table. So I'm going to start off. We have Brian Weinthal, who's a partner at Burke, Warren, MacKay Serritella from Chicago. Hi, Brian. How are you today? Awesome.
Great, thanks.
Good, okay. Brian is really going to bring to us the perspective from an employment and labor law perspective. He specializes in that. So I think that's going to be a really great thing. We're talking about work from home and the pandemic and how things have changed. And next we have Patrick Burke. Patrick Burke is joining us from New York City. Patrick Burke is the a partner at and chair of data technology and cybersecurity practice group at Phillips Nizer, again in New York City. Welcome, Patrick.
Good to be here.
Great to have you. Patrick really brings a unique perspective to the table here. He is an expert in cybersecurity and data privacy and technology. And so I really love the fact that he'll be, giving us his wisdom on, the things, from a technology perspective that we should be thinking about today. So welcome, Patrick.
Thank you.
And next we have Lauren Doerries, Senior Manager, Global Records and Information Governance from Walgreens and Boots Alliance, a worldwide company. Welcome, Lauren.
Glad to be here.
I'm really happy to have you here. Lauren's going to bring a great perspective from an in-house counsel point of view. What's it like with boots on the ground? How, like literally boots, sorry. And how what you're thinking about today, how you're handling this big shift in behavior. So really wonderful to have you. Thanks for being here, Lauren. And next we have Kelly. Kelly Twigger, who is the CEO of ESI Attorneys. Kelly has many of you probably know Kelly. She has a long history in the e-discovery business. She's an e-discovery attorney and helps corporations get litigation ready. And so welcome, Kelly, to the panel. I'm really looking forward to your perspective on how corporations should be getting ready for this period.
Thanks, Sarah. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And I'm Sarah Thompson. As Deirdre said, I'm with BlueStar Case Solutions. I've been in the legal technology arena my entire career. And so I'm going to bring the legal tech software perspective to the table. I've had a hand in creating many litigation review tools, or several litigation review tools, forensic collection tools, as well as data privacy and compliance platforms. And so that's what I'll bring to the table. So we are going to talk today about, what are the legal risks of the new normal? We all know that there's a lot of craziness going on. What should legal teams and legal professionals be thinking about today? We're going to talk about, not only what they should be thinking about, but perhaps what they should be doing or not doing as well. Legal obligations, some of these things have changed, and we may not be thinking of some of the things that we should be in terms of laws and regulations that either previously didn't exist or will be applied differently. So we'll look at that, and then we're going to talk about best practices. And so with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we're just going to get started talking about what has changed. Okay, and so we have a kind of a nice slide here that talks about, the before and after. And so what we really want to do right now is we're going to ask, I'm going to ask Patrick to kick this off. We all know what has happened in the past few months since, basically March of this year. Many businesses went from working in office to moving their employees at home. So that's not news to anybody. They've provided employees with new technology. They've had to adapt. They'd have to start using different platforms in the cloud. In your opinion, do you think businesses will revert back to an on-premise workforce once the pandemic has passed?
In my opinion, I think it's going to be a mix. I think in a lot of companies, they're going to just get used to this. And, I come from New York City, Manhattan, where real estate costs an arm and a leg. Mm-hmm. And I haven't spoken to a single client who isn't thinking they got too much real estate hanging around their neck out here. So I can tell you who would really like to have it go back. And that's IT folks. So right. IT folks are having challenges like they've never had before. And let's remember that these heroes of our corporate communications and documents are suddenly having to think about protecting their network from what used to be a small amount of potentially non-secure outside calls in their network to it's every day and everybody almost. So the tables have really been turned. They have these fantastic protections when you're using a company computer, when you're connected to the network, and all that is gone. Now there are at least several hops from the network. So in the new normal, folks are not on a company computer, right. A lot of times. So they don't have all the special sauce that the IT guys have put in there to protect from hackers and from all kinds of weird stuff going on. That's out. It then, every time they send something, it's going through an unsecured Wi-Fi network, which could be, outside of a coffee shop, or it could be, something that's shared with their entire family. It could be something that has a password that never got reset from the factory setting it. And so it's really super easy to crack. Then it goes to the internet where anything can happen. Then it goes to hopefully a solid VPN, but that's a third-party platform.
So Patrick, do you think that, there must be doing quite a bit of investment from the IT security at this time, would you say?
They sure are, but everyone's short on cash, right? So IT is very often made to deal on the lowest possible budget. So the idea of when companies are like living off of government loans to pay bills, to pay salaries, the idea of bringing in a whole new range of technology. Sure, if you're, probably different at, larger companies, but larger companies probably had a lot more going for them, to start with. And, so I think, and I'd be glad to hear from everyone else, in terms
Right.
of legal obligations for preserving potentially responsive materials, you got people who are working from home at all hours, right? They're using their own devices. So you might say, oh, well, they're using their own computer, but it's through a VPN. But really, are they always using a VPN? Are they doing their work? If they're going to go out and in the sun while they're working and they're outside of a Wi-Fi, they could just download that stuff onto their computer, work on, load it up.
Patrick, I'm going to totally interrupt you. If you've used a VPN to dial into your work, then you know how painful it is. And the answer is no. People who don't have to be on the VPN to be drafting a document aren't on the VPN.
So do we think that, Lauren, this is, since you work for one of, as I said, one of the largest corporations on the planet, do you feel that, after you've made this type of IT investment, that you're going to be rolling back all of this investment once the pandemic is over? Or do you see this as this is now the way it is? This is the, new normal, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be a hybrid. I mean, I think a lot of people were working remotely. At least at Walgreens, we moved to kind of a hybrid work from home, work on site, open office floor plan about a couple of years ago. So this is kind of a nice test of that capability that we were building out to be more digital, more modern workplace. But I think a lot of people are realizing they can do the same or even better work from home than they can do at the office. So I think just culturally that change is going to be really difficult to roll back. I know we haven't had a ton of folks that have been super interested in coming back to the office, earlier than they're absolutely required to. I think I see that happening most places right now. So I think it's going to be a delicate situation in terms of when we deem it to be safe and when we start to require that in terms of people altering their schedules and coming back into the office. So
absolutely,
I think it'll definitely be a mix.
Yeah, and Kelly, are you recommending to your, when you're consulting with your clients, are you saying, okay, hey, this is just temporary, or are you saying, hey, this is how it's going to be moving forward, implementing new kind of ways of doing business, what is your opinion there?
Well, a lot of our clients are moving to cloud-based services, Office 365, which we're going to talk about a little later, is become very prevalent among our clients. Many were moving to that, if they hadn't already at the start of COVID or during COVID, they moved quicker to it. And so there's governance around those kinds of issues that creates problems. But I think if, the way that we work with our clients, and I'm sure my co-panelists do, is to look at, okay, yes, this is what we're doing for now, but as we start to work together in person more, however that looks, whether it looks in, more of a WeWork environment or a downsized commercial environment, it's still going to mean that we want to be in person some. And so you have to look at, where is technology going? What are the safety risks? Or you're in a regulated industry, that's a whole other level of complication. And then, it's a layered approach, right? It's what has to work now to keep us where we need to be, and then what has to work for the future. So I think it's a lot for everybody. I think there was an article came out today that said GC's role has 10 times since COVID started. But I think, Brian's probably got some great perspective on how they're advising clients from an employment perspective.
Indeed. Sarah, did you want me to kind of jump in here, or I didn't want to get too ahead of your question?
No, please.
So from my perspective, I think the three greatest challenges that I'm seeing that employers are having to deal with are the updating of technology and equipment usage policies, the updating of social media policies, and in addition to those things, the idea of what the work schedule looks like. Is it flexible? Is it concrete? Are there particular hours? Now, all three of these things are born of the same problem that I think everyone on this panel will tell you is the root of the issue, which is we had very little time to prepare. This was not Y2K. We didn't know that we were suddenly going to have to be out of our offices for a full year on end. And to my knowledge, most people, after this thing, you'll pardon the pun, went viral in March, took the 2 to 3 weeks of warning we had and updated every policy they had in-house. Let me give you just a few quick examples that I see on the legal side. From a technology standpoint, as many people have just alluded to, work always follows the path of least resistance. If your employees can't use the VPN to get to the server, they're going to forward their work to their Gmail and pick up and run with it from there. They're dedicated, they're going to do their jobs, but they're going to find a way to do it away from company technology if they can't do it using company technology. The problem is, if you haven't put a policy in place that prohibits that, you can't take action on it from a people standpoint if your employees are doing it and you want to constrain it. You need to put that in a written policy of some kind. With regard to, I'm sorry, Sarah, I don't want to cut you off if you had a question you want to throw in there, because it's a good topic of conversation if you want to.
It's kind of like as a, building on that, Patrick mentioned earlier about, how for IT teams, it's a real challenge. But I mean, I think at the same time, without having, what you're saying is that without having that, that kind of people perspective adding that to the issue, then it really doesn't work. So you have to say to people, hey, this is the way we need to do it. And we need the policies to reflect that. It can't just be, these are the platforms. There has to be more to it than that. So it's not just the technology, it's the policies and procedures as well that are now out of date. Patrick, did you have anything else to add about what you think is the greatest legal challenges, other than, the fact that IT has to pivot, very quickly and make a large investment?
I would point out that we spent a lot of years arguing that the preservation obligation and discovery obligation in our litigations is limited to corporate computers and corporate networks. And that is likely to dissolve because people are going to be using their personal devices so much. So you're going to start seeing that you may really seriously have to look and see, has this person been using Gmail? Oh shoot, we got to collect from their Gmail account. We got to collect from their shared computer that they share with their kids. And oops, the stuff we're going to collect, like that part of it could evolve.
And, bringing it back to what Brian was saying, if you have no policy that talks about acceptable use of software devices, you're going to have a real fun time getting that phone out of their hands or getting access to that personal Gmail account. So I think those are both great points. Lauren, from an in-house perspective, what is your greatest challenge?
Yeah, so to Kelly's earlier point, the Microsoft 365 rollouts that either sped up or spun up as a direct result of the pandemic, I think presents a huge challenge, not just from a technical standpoint in terms of knowing how to collect from those sources, but from a process standpoint, we kind of have to rethink how we do collections and how we treat custodians in terms of, are they leading us to their information? Do they really know where their information is right now? Most people that use Teams, and I pick on Teams because it's an easy target, don't really understand kind of where that information is housed. What's going to Outlook, what's going to OneDrive. So that whole idea of custodian-led discovery has to change a little bit because we're ramping up that technology so fast that I think custodians are having trouble keeping up with where their stuff is.
Yeah, absolutely. Kelly, would you like to add to that?
Well, I think, some of what we've been working with our clients on for the last few months is putting, it's a combination of policies, but also moving around legal hold practices and identifying where those new sources of information are. And then something else that we are going to talk about, which is educating users. So, is video automatically turned on Teams? Are you recording Zoom calls? If you are they going to the computer or to the cloud? Who's doing what? What is the enterprise account setting? And where is that data going to? Because as we know from a discovery perspective, even if you're storing data with a third-party service, you still have to produce it. It's still within your custody or control. And so, just getting your arms around those new data sources is really important. And the other thing is, I think Lauren made a point, I'm not even sure if it was a point she was trying to make, but another one she did make is, look, people are trying to solve problems and they're trying to pivot their businesses. They're trying to stay in business. They're trying to do all kinds of things right now. And that means that different businesses, silos within the business, whether it's marketing, sales, whatever, are setting up new web-based tools that they need to run. And they're not necessarily calling up IT for help.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is important for the legal departments to be staying in touch with their clients and knowing what's happening, and to be sitting down and saying, look, if you're making things happen, that's awesome. We need you to work with us though, so that we can continue to make sure we're meeting our obligations, because they haven't changed, even though the world has changed. And so I think it's just a question of establishing contact, which in this current situation of the world is really hard. It's much more difficult. I mean, we spend our lives on Zoom calls.
I completely agree. And I have to say, you know, we specialize in Microsoft 365 eDiscovery, and we meet a lot with legal teams to talk about, you know, what does it do and where is it and how do we do it and what is our workflow, that kind of thing. And it can be very daunting for legal teams because, you know, all the documentation and is made for IT. And, you know, IT owns the budget for Microsoft 365 typically, as it is their productivity platform. And so, you know, what I think is a real challenge, and has been a challenge for many years, is, you know, getting legal and IT at the table together, having a kind of a good relationship so that they can kind of look at these technology decisions together, look at these policies together. Especially when you're talking about multinational corporations where you do have different data privacy regulations that apply. You have, you know, some companies, you know, especially if they're not US owned, may not understand the e-discovery obligations required for US employees, that kind of thing. And so I think it's been a problem for some time, because we've been seeing gradually a shift to the cloud over the past 5 years. You know, 7 years ago, nobody would have gone to the cloud. The cloud was a bad word. And now everyone's going there. And I think actually it could be a very good thing, but we just have to make sure that we're aware of what the challenges are and the risks. And so I think this is a great introduction to our next slide. So now that we've just discussed what the legal, kind of what keeps us up at night and what we think are the most, you know, pressing issues, you know, what do we think legal teams should be doing now? Because I think it's definitely something, you know. Lauren, you know, what about your team? You know, what is it, your first priority to kind of get your house in order today?
There's definitely a lot of priorities. So I'm not sure if I could even speak to the first one. But specific to our records and information governance team, figuring out where the data is definitely a big issue right now for everybody, I think. But it's keeping up with the speed of changes. Just as a quick example, Microsoft comes out with quite a few new features just about every day, if not every hour, it feels like. So something that we've done is just kind of spin up a few different committees. And everybody hates committees, but to keep IT and legal and privacy and everybody on the same page at the same time, to try to keep up with the changes that are happening on those platforms. So things like Teams, I think they just announced they're going to start recording calls or enable that. And they're turning things on and turning things off and pushing things out to enterprise clients, sometimes without people even being aware of it. You might find out that there's a new app available in Teams that IT just found out about, and you already have a bunch of users of it who really like it and don't want it to go anywhere. So keeping up with the changes as much as you can, has been crucial. And like somebody said earlier, it's making sure that we're not being we're being as less siloed as possible. So generally those calls have to involve somebody from legal, or have to be looped into privacy, or somebody from compliance. Every stakeholder pretty much needs to be part of all of these conversations kind of at the same time. So now's the time to get everybody at that table more than they ever were.
It definitely seems like those barriers are disappearing between the different the silos, which we've never really seen before. I think it's a pretty great thing, but it does have to happen now. Brian, from your perspective, what should legal teams be doing now from an employment perspective?
So many things. As I mentioned a second ago, I
just
think
high level. We'll get into the deep of it later.
sounds good. Although looking at the time, we clearly, this is clearly a panel that could delve into this a lot longer. Let me say that first and foremost, updating policies is key. So if in fact you want to prohibit or prevent your workplace from defaulting to either private email, private technology, or other platforms that are not what your company needs to be using, you need to put that down in writing and update that in the manner of your employee handbooks or other written policies that affect employees. Updating a handbook is a relatively modest investment, but it could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in costing later on if there are either problems with regard to employees using their own technology or litigation that's then going to require you to search private technology to get company-related information. A simple policy prohibiting it and allowing you to discipline on that basis if necessary could be key. Secondarily,
okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, please, Sarah. I don't want to cut off any topic of conversation. So go ahead if you got questions on that.
I just want to introduce these subjects broadly. So, I think that what we're hearing from the group is that, we need to know where our data is. We need to know what, technology our employees are using. And we need to understand how do we deal with that once litigation arises. So it's really looking at our ESI landscape. We also need to reevaluate corporate compliance is what we heard. And then we need to make sure that we've taken what we know, we've taken our procedures and we start putting them into policies and making sure that we distribute that to employees and train them. Is that what I'm hearing? Like that, those are kind of the things that we need to do now? Okay, so let's dive into the first one then. Let's dive into understanding, where your data is. So reevaluating your ESI landscape. I think this is a great question for Kelly. You talk to clients about this type of thing all the time. What is your data preservation strategy? This kind of thing. So let's talk to you. Since the pandemic has increased the corporate adoption of cloud-based solutions, both for IT and productivity. So for instance, for backup storage and Office 365, like we mentioned, and we're providing more devices to employees. What, if anything, do legal teams need to be doing now in response to the challenge in terms of reevaluating their ESI landscape?
Well, we talked about it a little bit already, and Lauren kind of put her finger on it, which is you need to know what your ESI landscape is becoming. And my experience is the only way to really know that is to actually talk to the custodians who have created, received, stored the information that's going to be relevant to a lawsuit. Now, when you start talking about hundreds of people, that becomes more difficult. But especially in this landscape, in-person interviews, very early on in a litigation situation are very important. Somebody else mentioned, maybe, I can't remember who it was, sorry, about the difficulty of the communication between IT and legal. And so you've got to have that liaison that knows to go directly to IT when there's a question. So the way that we work is a little bit different than outside counsel do. We typically are the liaison between IT and our legal department. So when we do custodian interviews and we have questions about how a new data source that a custodian raises are being stored, we go directly to IT. So there's not like a huge chain of we have to follow 5 people to be able to get the answer we need. We go and we get it, and then we move on, from a preservation perspective. So I think for other than the people using their own individual devices, which Patrick mentioned, and that is an issue, but you have to look at it as a source by source issue. So does that mean they're using their personal email account? Maybe it's a Gmail account, maybe it's a Yahoo account. Does that mean they're using text? Are they texting on their phone all the time? Because, those kinds of things, those are already sources that we were starting to see a lot of pre-COVID. So most folks that, had a plan together, we're prepared for that. And so it's a matter of shoring those issues back up. But it's definitely 100%, like we talked about earlier, about knowing your landscape. And the more you have to discover that in the context of litigation, the higher your risk for some sort of, I hate to use the word, but spoliation, because you just won't, spoliation in ESI happens because you don't know about it or you took active steps. 90% of the time it's because you don't know what you don't know. And so you need to know what you don't know before litigation happens.
I think it's a great point. And, we talked a lot about Office 365 before. And, one of the things that we talked to a lot of corporations about this, looking at their ESI landscape and Office 365 hand in hand. And, what concerns me from a technology perspective is that, one, it's like, they're picking, when you're picking different technology solutions, you're not picking it so that they're the best ones in from a, if we ever have to litigate and, collect the data from it.
Right.
I almost feel like maybe you should, there are times when you should ask yourselves.
That's not going to fly.
Well, there's times when you can, if I may, like let's take Office 365 for a moment. We can look at the different portions of Office 365 and tools, and we can think to ourselves, okay, we know that there is e-discovery and legal hold built into Office 365. Can we leverage that? Can we leverage that from a, from an ease of process perspective and a cost perspective? So there's those kind of questions that I think that corporations should be asking themselves, like, look at what you have and think about the challenge that you might have when the day comes. And it's better to think about it now, as you say, Kelly, than when litigation actually is on your doorstep.
It absolutely is. And the specifics of what you need to think about depend on the types of litigation that you have, the value of the litigation, other non-monetary issues like PR, goodwill associated with your business for being involved in particular types of litigation, which can have an enormous monetary component to them. And so you really have to, Office 365 is a great example. Can you go in and use Office 365 to search and put parameters around the data that you're getting? Yes. I think if you ask 5 people, you might get 4 or 5 different answers to that. And so
it has that functionality.
Yeah, so. It has the functionality, right? But so the way that we advise our clients is, look, every single client is different. Every lawsuit is different. The way that you engage in processes needs to have similarities, but there are going to be differences for each case and each source of data, and sometimes custodians. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely something you need to get as much information as you can about at the beginning, so you can deal with those specifics in the context of a lawsuit.
Yeah, I know. Thank you, Kelly. Patrick, you talked earlier about personal devices, and you made some comments in our discussions when planning this about, how you feel like personal device collection might change during this, after this time or during this time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's a really sticky issue, right? Like, you actually going to be able to get employees to turn over their personal devices? Mm-hmm. Are you going to be able to get straight answers about whether they use them or not? Mm-hmm. I've actually seen an uptick in using WhatsApp or WeChat or other kinds of, because they know they're working off their phone while they're driving around or walking around, and so it's getting all mushed up. And in the meantime, people are having to worry about things like, where are the cake pans, right? While they're working, so I just think that barrier to keeping opposing counsel out of your employees' personal devices is just probably weakening, and we should be teaching employees how not to do it, or give them technology to make it easier not to do that. But teaching it's got to be really good teaching. It can't be, do this hour-and-a-half video that we're putting up. It's got to be something that's really relevant and catchy, because people are stressed.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about like the training aspect in a moment. But so I think just to sum it up, know what you have, know where it is, and think about, when you're looking at all the different tools that you're using, how are you going to go, how will you react when litigation occurs? So I think that's a really great, those are some really great points. Thank you so much. So let's talk a little bit about, from a compliance perspective, so what do you think a corporation should be thinking about right now, Brian? You talked a little bit about the employee handbook, but let's talk about specifics here.
Sure. As I alluded to earlier on, and I'll mention this one real quick because I think it's so important. Updating social media policies is going to be critical during this period of time. Mm-hmm. As we all know, the absolute preferred social media post of the last 6 months is a photo of you in front of your computer with 25 Zoom faces on the screen. And we all love these photos of ourselves in home offices and doing things from home. But of course, the problem is if you snap a shot of yourself in your home office and the Penske file is sitting right next to where you're taking the photograph, you may have just alerted the world that Penske is a client, or worse yet, given some information on Penske to the world. To quote the Seinfeld reference, you're not going to be Penske material after that point in time. So ultimately, making sure that you update your social media policies is going to be key to prevent the release of information. So I wanted to circle back to that.
Okay.
The one other big statute I want to make a point on real quickly is the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This year, we gained a statute that actually allows for either paid sick leave or paid family medical leave if folks are affected by corona in one of several different ways: a diagnosis for someone they're caring for, the need to seek medical attention, or ultimately the need to care for children that are at home without daycare or homeschooling. The big problem, though, is I think a lot of companies for some reason believe that since we're all at home, the benefits of the FFCRA don't apply. I can't tell you the number of times a CEO has said to me, well, I know they're diagnosed with COVID, but they're home already, so they just go to bed, and then we take them off the books for a few weeks. Not true, okay? Your employees have rights and access to potential paid benefits if they alert you to a diagnosis of COVID. You can't simply order them to keep working through it, bench them for the period of time and not pay them, or just simply tell them that they can do their work from bed. It doesn't work that way, and I think a lot of businesses may be losing sight of that as we go through this. So the FFCRA is a big one I wanted to mention as we work through this.
That's really helpful, Brian. Thank you for that, because, you know, I don't think not everybody knows about that.
No.
It's a great perspective.
Yeah. Sarah, can I add something real quick? In terms of, because we've talked about updating policies, which I definitely think is really important, but I think it's also really important to make sure that we're educating the employees about those changes to the policies. And one way that we've done it, or had clients do it very successfully, is through short videos, whether it's from the CEO or from the people officer, or, you know, whoever makes the most sense for that organization, because it's more of an opportunity to personally engage. Larger corporations, larger businesses, and even some government agencies already have, you know, their own university where they can provide that information through. But even just a simple video that kind of walks you through the changes and what the purpose of it is for the business and what you're thinking about helps the employees really think about, you know, why I shouldn't take a picture of me on Zoom with all my client stuff sitting next to me. I mean, they just need context, right? I mean, we're talking a lot about all these legal things that we need to think about, but, you know, we also have to remember that this is an incredibly difficult and mentally and physically challenging time for everyone. And, you know, compassion for employees and all the things that go with that are just of the utmost importance. And I think, you know, I know that our clients are striving to be as compassionate as possible. I think the communication of all of these kinds of changes and things that Brian's talking about are really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me add one quick point to what Kelly said, which is, remember also that roles are becoming transformative. So if your employees are asking for modifications or changes to their jobs, you need to be aware of that. Let me give you an example. Most companies probably have a representative from office services going to the physical office once or twice a week to either sort mail, put packages in the offices where they need to be, things like that. Packages coming in on any given day may not be a big deal, but if an employee who's showing up once a week has to move 300 packages throughout the office and has a physical condition of some kind that's not going to allow them to do that in the same way they ordinarily would day to day, you need to be aware of that and work with them to get through that, because if you don't, you could very well walk headlong into an ADA violation, Americans with Disabilities Act violation. So be aware that roles are changing, and you must engage with your employees to figure out what they need to do the jobs that they may have previously had in a different way.
It almost feels like, you know, as a legal team, or at least some part of the corporation needs to start conducting some interviews from the bottom up or top down, whatever, to really understand, you know, what day-to-day looks like for people. You know, to understand what the activities people are engaging in that may be different than before. So that's the most
successful client. I'm sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the most successful clients I have right now are clients who have dedicated an ombudsman team of some kind to addressing and patching holes in the dam for COVID issues. Be they X, be they Y, be they Z, it's just simply a multi-jurisdictional team to address whatever the beef is as it comes up. And frankly, COVID is arguably one of the best defenses you could have against the various liability claims that might accrue. But the idea is if you're actively engaging with your employees to address their concerns as they come up, boy, you're going to look a lot better than folks that are just telling their employees to power through it or not addressing those issues.
That's a great point. Lauren, are you having to go and review all of your policies and procedures in-house? And if so, what are the kind of areas or policies that you're focusing on?
Yeah, so Brian mentioned a lot of them. There's a lot that come up that aren't necessarily the ones you'd think of. So it's not all technology and you know, to Brian's point, social media related, and that's not even touching screen sharing as a potential method of breach. But I think I accidentally shared my screen with somebody on Teams the other day. That wasn't the person I was talking to. It was just like a random person. Teams, again, very easy target. But certain policies like shredding, so printing, things like if you formally connected via network printers, generally speaking, so if you had a kind of an open office and people could connect to any printer in the building, or if you have multiple offices and you made it easy for your employees to print anywhere, it still probably is very easy for them to print anywhere. So keeping in mind, you know, turning off things like that or changing things like that so confidential information doesn't get printed somewhere accidentally.
Yeah,
so changing shredding policies for people that print at home or having a print at home policy if you don't have one. You know, we've had questions about people asking, where do I go to drop off my shred docs? And like, I printed this, but it's confidential. You know, reminding employees too, and that's part of training we'll talk about in a little bit, but that confidentiality and data breach applies to physical records just like it applies to digital records. So it's more about updating, I think, existing policies probably than creating new ones.
That's a really great point, because a lot of us, you know, focus on the digital changes, but you know, there really is a actual physical change of location and, you know, environment. And so that's a really great point. You know, we have to think about the tangibles in terms of policies and procedures and security. What about you, Patrick? What do you think? What policies and procedures do you think corporations should be looking at now?
You know, the policy that surprised me was, you know, these companies are shipping out a lot of computer hardware to a lot of employees, you know, so laptops and their screens and their, you know, all kinds of stuff. They need to have the employees sign off on those, you know, because sometimes employees will tend to acquire a certain sense of ownership in those things. They may be using it for their own personal use. There's a lot of things to think about in terms of actually how do you return them? How are we going to get them back? Are we going to deduct it from your pay if we need to take them back and you don't want to give them to us? What do you do if they break? Whose fault is it? Is it break? You know, these are all lawyer questions, but I'm telling you, it's the kind of thing we've never really had to handle before on a large scale.
Yeah, I mean, we just to follow up on that, because our firm and our software company are predominantly virtual before COVID. I mean, we did have a brick and mortar office here in Boulder, but we're predominantly virtual, and we have policies for all of that. You know, we send out hardware and there are costs associated with it, and you know, you don't get final paychecks until it all comes back or the amounts are deducted. So it's those things. Yeah.
Put them in the agreement.
Yep.
You know, in my career, I've seen some pretty crazy things in terms of data preservation, even before COVID. You know, large corporations, you know, throwing, you know, off-boarded employee laptops into a closet, you know, no labels, nothing. So, you know, we had a problem before, and now we really have to start addressing it. And I think that, you know, we've all made some amazing points. You know, from my perspective, I think that the acceptable use and approved software is super important. Approved software as opposed to the unapproved software. Here's the things that you can use to share company data with employee sign off, of course, and acknowledgement. I think that's a very important thing. Doesn't mean people are going to follow it all the time, but I mean, it's all about the policy, and it's about, you know, training, which is a great thing to kind of lead us into our next slide. And we kind of talked about this a little bit already. the importance of training. Kelly was talking about that, but so we've got these great policies and procedures. Now what? This question is going to be for Kelly. This is your section. What do you think? Do you feel it's necessary to conduct company-wide training? And if so, what do you think you need to train them on exactly?
Well, I think that's going to, my muted now. Okay. That's going to depend on business by business, right?
Okay.
And Brian's got thoughts on this as well,
Yeah.
is that, you need to get your group together. I'm sure Lauren's already done this, but you've got to have your folks together. You got to identify what needs to change and get it changed. And then you've got to educate people on why you changed it. It is hard, but in some ways, I think depending on if you approach the training from a real person perspective, of acknowledging everything that folks are going through right now, people are looking for guidance. I mean, they need, look, we don't have any structure in what's happening. I've got 3 kids here on online school, and my daughter's computer melted down this morning during her first period. And, we need some structure. So giving folks some training is a great thing. So they know what to expect. They know how to handle their data. They know what to do when they can't get in on the VPN. They know how to deal with the cybersecurity issues that Patrick's raising. They want that. I mean, we're professionals. We want to do our jobs well, and we want to take care of our clients' data, and we want to do what we're supposed to do, and we want to help the company move forward during a very difficult time. So training is I don't know if I think of it so much like training, but guidance in
Right.
the way that things
Education is kind of how I see it. And,
Yeah.
I used to be a trainer in my past life, and I'll tell you, it's the way that we always did it is talk about the why. Like, let's talk about real world situations. Why are we asking you to do this? Why is this so stringent? Why? Because we know it's a pain for you to, send it through OneDrive instead of going on your Gmail. Why do we ask you this? And then kind of like give them real life, real world consequences. And I think people like that. People get interested in that. They feel like a little bit in Law and Order,
Yeah, exactly. From a preservation and a legal hold perspective, we don't do, unless there's a big change, and I would ask Lauren to speak to this because maybe she had something like this at Walgreens, but typically we kind of educate custodians as we go through custodian interviews, right? I mean, there's no reason to educate custodians on how to collect from Office 365 if we're going to go collect directly from Office 365. I think that the education does vary, but in a lawsuit situation, we typically do it individually, on a who needs it basis. So
Lauren, what is your,
it depends. So it depends on the questions you're asking, right? So if you're going to collect from 365, then they don't need to know that. But at the same time, if it's a smaller case, and not every case requires a huge back-end collection or a collection at all, if it's more of a, do you still have this document, or do you still have information related to XYZ, people might not understand that their Teams chat files are retained forever in their OneDrive. So they may tell you no, but actually in the background, it's lingering out there. So, I think for training purposes, just educating people on exactly how these new fun tools actually work and kind of what that means on the back end for their information and where it goes and how long it stays there, and how they can get rid of it, and who they're sharing it with, very importantly, and how long that sharing lasts, I think is critical. And I think also because everybody's on different schedules today too, having those resources out there and accessible at all times is really crucial too. So we may have, in-person or webinar trainings or, required trainings, but having those kinds of FAQs and, snippets of information out there that people can just download whenever they need it is really important.
Absolutely. Okay, I have some questions from the audience. For a question from Vaibhav Kadam, and so hopefully I pronounced that correctly. How is the privacy to be handled when people are using their personal devices and email is the question. So who would like to take that? So how is the privacy to be handled when people are using their personal devices and email? So you need to collect, Patrick, you mentioned you needed to collect, you might start to collect from Gmail or someone's personal phone. How would you go about handling something like that?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, a lot of times when you collect, you pull all the data off and then you parse it. Kelly probably has a lot more tricks up her sleeve on doing that. But it's very hard to parse a business conversation from a personal conversation, from really explicit, very personal, private conversation. So it gets tricky.
There's a lot of elements to that question, I think. And so I paused for a minute, but, so I think people have to understand that if they're putting work-related information on their private phones, that that private phone is going to have to be discoverable. So that's your choice.
That's
right?
That's your training, right? Like
that's
you
number
want to tell
one.
people, like
and so that's
you don't want to do that because that's
you need to educate people. And then the reality is that if you're going to take a full forensic image of a device, you're going to have all that party's data. So whatever's on there, whatever photographs you didn't want somebody to see, they're potentially there. Now, there are tools that can allow you to do things in a more targeted approach by source, getting text messages and even certain conversations. But I think the biggest overall thing is if people are using their private devices for work-related information, they are subjecting them to discovery in a litigation situation, should that arise. You should have policies that address the acceptable use of private devices. Now, people are going to do it anyway, so they need to understand that. I've had GCs that misunderstand a BYOD policy to believe that if someone chooses to use their personal device, it's not subject to discovery. That's not correct. And there's case law to that.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to know that from a forensic perspective, the only way to have a forensically sound preservation of an actual phone, particularly an iPhone specifically, actually, is a forensic image. So getting those targeted messages, your policy is probably you have to take a forensic image of the phone, and that's everything. So I think it's important that people know.
Well, you won't be the first person that I've said this to. Many people will know I already believe this, but I don't always think that a forensic image is necessary for proper preservation.
Well, for an iPhone specifically now, the modern phones, the requirement, because your text messages are not going to necessarily be there. But let's not get into the nitty gritty. Brian, did you have anything to add to that?
The comment I was going to add on to that. The comment I was going to add on to it is the greater challenge in all of this, once you have your policy set, is making sure that from the top down, you follow them. Companies have a bad tendency when someone with a significant amount of power wants to do something differently of allowing exceptions for those folks. A good example might be, we all got very, very good at Zoom in April of this year. And ultimately the arising of other platforms like Teams followed after that. We didn't really want to learn Teams. We were comfortable with Zoom, and it's tough to get folks shifted over. There's obviously companies now that just use exclusively Teams or other platforms because there are security risks in Zoom. But I see very often when old man or old woman, whoever at the company doesn't like Teams and we're going to have a Zoom meeting for it, they switch back and go back to the other platform. So sticking by your policies is a real tough thing to do. Companies should be aware of that.
We have another question that's very well said. Thank you, Brian. I'm very curious about, this is another question from Darius Bennett. What new social media policies would look like, and what cybersecurity measures and or data privacy protections should be in place right now? So let's take it one by one. The new what should new social media policies look like?
Social media policies are cutting edge, as you might expect. I don't think before more than a few years ago, we thought in employee handbooks, you would have to tailor them in. Right. They're very specific to companies, and they generally tend to go by levels. Some companies simply prohibit employees from mentioning work or their workplace on social media, while others have much more significant regulations in place. Never intimating that you're affiliated with a company, not putting your connection to a company in media or pictures, etc. The big takeaway for folks listening to keep in mind is, whenever we talk about regulating social media, somebody always pipes up and says, well, don't I have a First Amendment right to write what I want? The answer is no, and I want everybody on the call to remember that. The lawyers might know this, but the non-lawyers have to be reminded. Remember that the First Amendment only protects you against one thing: the government. No one in this country is ever going to jail for something they write or something they put in print. But it is not the case that your employer can't stop you from using social media. They can put those rules in place, so be aware of that when you join a company and be aware of what they put out in their social media policies.
Well, that's a good point. We have another question here. How are the effects of the pandemic and work from home shifting the need and justification of hiring dedicated legal operations professionals to help, the company, get together their work from home policies and procedures, that kind of thing? Maybe Lauren, are you looking outside to kind of get extra help for this? You mentioned you had some committees that you were forming, and
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more on the to-do list for our legal ops team. Our records and information governance team actually falls into legal ops at Walgreens, so we kind of get to see that firsthand. But yeah, so they're typically tasked too with, just for the department itself, figuring out kind of disaster recovery and how to keep the department running and how to make sure that everybody is connected and has the right resources. So now they're also, trying to kind of set an example, I think, for the rest of the company. So the shift towards, being technology savvy, if it starts with the legal department, tends to trickle down a lot faster. So we've seen our legal department kind of step into that technology role, I think, a lot more recently.
so you think there's opportunity in the legal ops space for career-wise?
I think there's definitely always, I think that role is not going anywhere, especially with, trying to get costs and spend under control. But I think that role is expanding to different responsibilities now that there's just a lot more going on.
Wonderful. And it kind of leads into, this is a really great question that someone asked. It says, data mapping can be expensive. So we're understanding your ESI landscape. And the question is, how do you convince the exec team, decision makers, to invest in this type of effort if they don't understand it? So, what are some examples, or I'm sure all of you have faced this in your careers?
If I can hop in on this one, here's what I would say. First of all, you don't need to do a data map of your entire organization. You need to look at what are the standard sources of data that you're pulling from for litigation, and that there's always going to be a little bit of variation from there, but you start with that, and you start understanding what those main sources are so that you can deal with those. And then you can deal with a one-off in a particular litigation on a much more easier fashion. Getting a consultant or an attorney who's familiar with these things to help you do that can be very fast. You can data map Office 365 with one conversation if you know the questions to ask. And so that shouldn't be an overwhelming process for you. I think sometimes we think we have to map the entire organization. There was a second part to your question, and it's flown out of my head.
I think for the buy-in.
Oh, for the buy-in.
Yeah.
So the way that we do that, thanks, Lauren. The way that we do that with our clients is we'll show them ROI of metrics of different data sources. So one that's really simple is pull a quantity of data and run a search for how many times people talk about lunch in email. Mm-hmm. And then show them how much data you're processing from an e-discovery perspective to deal with lunch, and then show them, how you could educate your people to use IM or other, services that you might not collect an e-discovery for that purpose. And so you really have to be able to show, here's the average dollars that you're spending, and here's how we can reduce that spend by understanding a better way to do flow. I mean,
absolutely. Money talks. That's always the best approach.
Privacy fines are also a big and easy one to point to in terms of knowing where your data is.
Yep.
Oh, great point, Lauren. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this is going to be, actually, that's going to be it for the questions. So we're at 2:00. I would just like to say thank you to all of our panelists. This has been a great conversation. You guys are all wonderful. Thanks so much for attending. And thank you so much for our attendees for joining us today. We have some extra questions here in the chat that we will be getting to you. Hopefully we'll send them to you we'll email you and give you our answers. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact us directly. Again, thanks again from everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.